கவிஞர் சுகுமாரன் அவர்களை சிறப்புரை ஆற்ற இருக்கும் மராத்திய கவிஞர் பேராசிரியர் சந்திரகாந்த் பட்டில் பற்றிய அறிமுக உரையை தருவதற்கு அன்புடன் அழைக்கின்றோம்.
Good evening to all gathered here. ஆங்கிலத்தில் பேசுகிறது சந்திரகாந்த் பாட்டிலுக்கு புரியணுங்களுக்காக. I stand here to say a few words to introduce our chief guest of the evening, the renowned Marathi poet Chandrakant Patil. For a person who follows the traces of poetry in other Indian languages, Chandrakant does not need any introduction. He is one of the strong and original voices of Marathi poetry. I keep a line of poets in Marathi poetry to keenly observe consists certainly Chandrakant Patil with the names of Arun Kolatkar and Vishnu Gare. He writes, he is a man from the world of science. He is a physics professor in his profession. He writes not only in Marathi but also in Hindi. He writes criticism on poetry, I think, in both the languages and as well as in English. I would like to recall one of his articles published by Sahitya Academy. The title is Indian Poetry, Modernism and Afterwards in Marathi Context. The article gives a deep insight as well as a broad scenario of contemporary Marathi poetry. I am personally indebted to Chandrakant Patil for an occasion in which I enjoyed the immense recognition as a poet from Tamil. It was somewhere in 95 or 96. I had been invited to take part in the great Marathi language conference held at Parbhani, Maharashtra. I still remember the honor shown to a Tamil poet, that was me. I assume that this is the first occasion Chandrakant visits Tamil Nadu as a poet. Though he had written, I think, 2 poems about Tamil Nadu. One is about Uttaraman and one is about Kodaikanal. Usually, Chandrakant used to say that he knows 2 poets from Tamil Nadu. One Salma and another is myself. Atmanam Trust or Mr. Srinivasan, directly or indirectly, wants to alter the statement of Chandrakant. I think in this gathering, he can meet a galaxy of Tamil poets. On behalf of all, I invite my poet friend Chandrakant Patil to this occasion. Welcome to Tamil World of Poetry. அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். தமிழில் பேசுகிறது கொஞ்சம் சுலபமாக இருக்கும். சந்திரகாந்த் பாட்டில் தொழில் முறையில் ஒரு பௌதிக பேராசிரியராக பணியாற்றியவர். மராத்தி இதில் எவ்வளவு சரளமாக எழுதுவாரோ அதே சரளத்தோடு ஹிந்தியிலையும் எழுதக்கூடியவர். இந்திய மொழிகள் பலதிலிருந்தும் கவிதைகளை ஹிந்தியிலையும் மராட்டியிலையும் பண்ணியிருக்கார். தமிழிலிருந்து இடம்பெற்றது ஆங்கிலத்தில் பேசும்போது சொன்ன மாதிரி 2 கவிஞர்கள் தான். ஒன்று நானும், இன்னொன்று சல்மாவும். இந்த நிகழ்வுக்கு பிறகு நிறைய தமிழ் கவிஞர்கள் மராத்தியில் மொழிபெயர்க்கப்படுவார்கள் என்று நான் நம்புகிறேன். 1995 அல்லது 96 நம்முடைய உலகத்தமிழ் மாநாடுகள் போல மிக பிரம்மாண்டமாக நடந்த ஒரு மராத்தி மாநாட்டில் கலந்து கொள்ள அழைக்கப்பட்ட தமிழ் கவிஞன் நான். அதுக்கு காரணம் வந்து அவர் தான். ஒரு கவிஞனாக எனக்கு கிடைத்த மிகப்பெரிய அங்கீகாரம் வந்து அதுதான். கிட்டத்தட்ட யானை மேலே உட்கார வச்சு அழைச்சிட்டு போகலை அப்படிங்கிற குறையை தவிர தலையில் கிரீடம் சூட்டி ஷால் போத்தி கையில் நிறைய தேங்காய் அது மாதிரியான பரிசு பொருட்கள் எல்லாம் கொடுத்தது. அது மட்டும் இல்லை, அந்த கவிதைகள் வந்து மராத்தியில் மொழிபெயர்க்கப்பட்டு முன்பே கொடுக்கப்பட்டதனால் அங்கிருந்த பள்ளி குழந்தைகள் நான் ஒரு கவிதை வரியை சொல்லும்போது அவங்க அந்த வரியை திரும்ப சொல்லுவாங்க. என்னுடைய தமிழ் கவிதை ஒரு மராத்தி குழந்தையின் வாயிலிருந்து தமிழாக வெளிப்பட்டதுங்கிறது வந்து எனக்கு கிடைத்த மிகப்பெரிய பெருமையாக நான் நினைக்கிறேன். இந்த பெருமையை நான் அவருக்கு திரும்ப கொடுக்க விரும்புகிறேன். அவருடைய சில கவிதைகளை இங்கே நான் வாசிக்க விரும்புகிறேன். இந்த கவிதைகள் மூலம் அவர் என்ன மாதிரியான கவிஞர் என்கிற அடையாளத்தை நாம் கண்டுகொள்ளவும் அது உதவும். கஜுரஹோ விஸ்வநாதர் ஆலயத்தில் காமுக இணையர் விகாரமாக நிற்கிறார்கள். மத்திய காலத்திலிருந்து ஆணை தழுவிக்கொண்டு அங்கே நின்ற பெண் சட்டென்று அவனை தூர தள்ளுகிறாள். அணிவகுப்பில் செல்லும் படை வீரனைப் போல் விரைப்பாக நிற்கிறாள். யுகங்களாக புன்னகைத்துக் கொண்டு மெத்தனமாக இருந்த ஆண் திடீரென்று குழம்பி தலைகுப்புற விழுகிறான். பெண்ணோ 21ஆம் நூற்றாண்டைச் சேர்ந்தவளைப் போல் வெற்றி சிறுக்கினள் ஆகிறாள். என்ன ஆயிற்று பெண்ணுக்கு? எந்த கடவுள் இந்த தொல்லையும் வம்பையும் அவளிடம் தருவித்தாள்? ஏன் அவள் இந்த வஞ்ச வினையை யோசித்தாள்? ஏமாற்றத்தில் தன்னை விலக்கிக் கொண்ட காமுகன் தன்னம்பிக்கை இழக்கிறான். அவனுடைய உணர்ச்சி தற்காப்புகள் சரிகின்றன. முழு பித்தனாகிறான் ஆண். என்ன ஆயிற்று பெண்ணுக்கு? அடுத்த சட்டகத்தில் இருக்கும் ஆணை வசிய பார்வை பார்க்கிறாளா? இல்லை, காதலின் ஆண் கபடத்தை புரிந்து கொண்டாளா? அல்லது இந்த பெண் காமத்தின் பொருளை அர்த்தத்துடன் பொருத்த முயல்கிறாளா? இந்த இரண்டு கவிதைகளும் நண்பர் கோபாலகிருஷ்ணன் ஹிந்தியிலிருந்து மொழிபெயர்த்து கொடுத்தது. அவர் வெளியிட்ட ஒரு தொகுப்பில் வந்திருக்கிறது. கொடைக்கானல். நீண்ட காலத்துக்கு பிறகு மீண்டும் ஒரு முறை கொடைக்கானல். மலைகளுடனும் மேகங்களுடனும் ஆகாயத்துடனும் பாதாளங்களுடனும் மீண்டும் ஒரு முறை நேரடி சந்திப்பு. எந்த இடமும் மிஞ்சவில்லை. மனித முடிவுகளின் அழுக்கற்று. பைன், சைப்ரஸ், யூக்கலிப்டஸ் என இத்தனை பருத்த உயர்ந்த மரங்கள் தனித்து நின்றால் சாம்பலாகிவிடக்கூடும் என்றெண்ணி படையணி வீரர்கள் போல் வினோதமாய் நிற்கின்றன. கொடைக்கானல் இன்று பேரழிவின் பக்கமாய் தலை சாய்த்திருக்கும் மரங்களாலான வெறும் மாநகரம். உதகமண்டலம். உதகமண்டலம் உயரமான மரங்கள், சின்ன சின்ன பெரணைகள், ஈரமும் குளிருமான மழை, அலையும் மேகம் நனையும் மலைகள், தொங்கும் ஆகாயம், ஏரி, அருவி, பாறை, அகழிகள் என எல்லாவற்றையும் வாங்குகிறார்கள் சுற்றுலா பயணிகள். உயர்ந்த மலைகளிலிருந்து இறங்கி கணவாய்களை கடந்து மெல்ல மெல்ல ஒவ்வொன்றாக ஓடிக்கொண்டிருக்கின்றன எல்லா மரங்களும். சுற்றுலா பயணிகளால் நொந்து போய்விட்ட மரங்கள். நன்றி. I invite our beloved chief guest, Chandrakant Patil, to deliver his keynote address.
Our dignitaries on this side, Chairman Thiru Perumalji, all dignitaries or all lovers of poetry and literature in front of me, I thank you all when I can, and I express my inability to speak in your language, and I am ashamed that I have not learned in my life any of the South Indian language. Sorry for that. First of all, I thank the Atmanam and its members for inviting me. If Srinivasa Natarajan had not insisted, I would not have been able to come here and share my views with you. I have come to Chennai after 55 years. I remember I had been to Chennai in 1963. I was an MSc student and had come to Chennai to study marine flora. Now, afterwards, I was deeply impressed by the great tradition of Tamil poetry. I am really very happy to visit the land of Sangam poets, Thiruvalluvar and Subramanyam Bharati. Without your organization, it would not have been possible for me. I would like to congratulate Bogan Shankar, a leading poet of new generation, as he has received the Atmanam Award for this year. It gives me an immense pleasure to see the poet being honored in our society, because I believe that poetry is the purest form of literature. It is only in poetry your language is at stake. Later, in the context of my speech, I'll discuss my views on poetry. Poetry is my lifelong concern. Poetry tops the list of my priorities, even if I get engaged in other literary activities like translation, criticism, or even editing the anthologies of poetry in Marathi and Hindi. In all my activities, poetry is the first, and till this date, I have kept it alive. That is why I am really happy that the award is given to the poet Bogan Shankar. I would love reading his poetry in translation. On the surface level, translation of poetry appears to be very easy and simple, but those who translate poetry know it well that it is a very tough and challenging task. Poetry constitutes the most complex structures of language, and it makes the translations more difficult because of the intricate relationship between form and structure. The process of translation teaches us to observe the interior of our own language minutely and newly. It compels us to explore different dimensions and possibilities of language. Translation contributes to the expansion of our understanding. It enriches our sensibility and our culture. A cat sharpens her nails by rubbing them against the bark of a tree. Similarly, poets and writers sharpen their language through translation. I often say translation is a poet's pasture wherein they can freely and uninhibitedly graze. I heartily congratulate Karthikai Pandian and Anuradha Anand as they have received awards for the translation of poetry. Karthikai Pandian has translated 145 years old free verse classic of Arthur Rimbaud, A Season in Hell, which had changed the course of French poetry. Anuradha Anand has translated some of the contemporary American poets. As far as both these translators are concerned, There are some striking similarities between their translations. The world of Rimbaud's poetry is dominated by homosexuality and drug addiction. Anuradha Anand had selected the poems of gay, queer, and transgender poets. In the age of retrogressive morality, these poems challenge the established framework of social morality and revolt against it. It is a free expression of repressed consciousness of the individuals of society. Time will decide how the culture will accommodate them, but we must try to preserve the diversity in literature at any cost. On this occasion, let me also express my concern regarding the translation of Tamil poetry in Indian languages. The canvas of Tamil poetry is very vast. Barring the exception of Sanskrit and Pali, no other Indian language has such a long tradition of poetry. Yet, Tamil poetry is not available to the Indian readers in translation to the extent that Malayalam and Kannada poetry is available. Therefore, it is essential to translate Tamil poetry into Indian languages, either through linked languages like Hindi and English, or directly. And I think a new generation should take up this task with all sincerity, passion, and commitment. Personally, I am familiar with the poetic traditions of all Indian languages. I have also been keeping pace with the contemporary Indian poetry. But I know only two poets from Tamil Nadu. One is my friend Sukumaran, and the other is Salama, to whom I know very well, because we were together in Beijing some 10 years back. I have translated some of their poems in Marathi also. Translations of the popular and the prolific lyricists like Vairamuthu into English and Hindi are understandable. But at the same time, it is essential to translate the poets in the mainstream of Tamil. Now I wish to discuss my views on poetry with you. I believe that a purpose of literature is to explore the meaning of life. The purpose of poetry is no different from this. Then what distinguishes poetry from the prose? I think poetry complements to the metaphysical and spiritual quest of man. When I use the term spirituality, I mean spirituality devoid of religion. What is the mystery of the universe? What is the mystery of the nature? What is this mystery of death? What is the meaning of human existence? What makes space and time mysterious? What is the nature of being and becoming? What has remained undiscovered in nature and in human mind? Down the centuries, serious poetry has been courageously dealing with such complex questions. It does not mean that poetry should negate its immediate environment. Poetry must speak about reality, the society, injustice, inequality, oppression, and exploitation in human customs, rituals, and traditions. Sometimes it should speak against all forms of injustices, even at the cost of life. But the mere expression of all these things should not be the ultimate aim of poetry. Poetry should go beyond these things in search of the eternal human values. Otherwise, there is a danger of being momentary to the poetry. Such poets and their poems disappear from the poetic scene once the issues they raise become irrelevant in society. A poet should be able to create his universal vision. No doubt, ideology contributes in developing the Weltanschauung or the worldview. At the same time, we should not forget that the role of the ideology is limited and ends here. Let me explain it in a different way. If you directly jump into the swimming pool, you may not go that deeper. But if you use a springboard to jump, you may dive into the deepest part of the swimming pool. Ideology is like a springboard. It helps us to dive into the deeper terrains of life and thereby explore its meaning. Ideology can never be the ultimate aim of poetry. Poets have been striving hard to explore the meaning of life since the days of ancient epics to the modern poetry. But no one has understood the meaning of life completely. Hence, this endless creation of literature. That is why the creation of poetry also continues, and it will continue for centuries to come. Poetry will always be needed. Precisely, what is the definition of poetry? Several creative geniuses have tried to define poetry till this date, but no definition is complete and final. In such a situation, instead of looking for the definition of poetry, it is more appropriate to see the qualities of poetry. Poetry is a very precise expression of human experiences. It is more appropriate to talk about the process of experiences instead of narrating the output of the experiences. These experiences should be minute and complex. The superficial, known, and the predictable nature of experiences produce inferior poetry. Presenting the familiar is the mark of a mediocre poetry. The language of poetry should be precise, suggestive, abstract, unfamiliar, and even ambiguous. Poet has to use the same day-to-day mundane language, and it is from this familiar language he has to create a defamiliarized language of poetry. The language of poetry states something but aspires to suggest something altogether different. Such creative language of poetry enhances the imagination of its readers and encourages their participation. Only in the creative use of language in poetry we can have a glimpse of poet's intuitive power. Only the creative language can accommodate and give space to the spontaneous knowledge and the intuition of the poet. Although poetry views the objects from the prism of emotions, it constantly keeps moving from emotions to intelligence and from intelligence to beauty. That is why good poetry could be read and enjoyed again and again. Experiences in poetry are rooted in vast and complex life. In our life, happiness is momentary, whereas suffering is endless. Within a very short span of time, happiness comes to an end. It is attainable, and therefore, though it is fragmentary, it becomes our goal. We should set such a goal as it is within the range of the human reach. But suffering in life never ends, and it is not possible to end it. As a result, the expression of suffering is bound to be intense. But many poets consider the lack of material things, or the day-to-day problems as suffering. That is not suffering at all. They consider these routine problems as suffering. They fail to understand that day-to-day problems of living and suffering are two different notions. Consequently, their poetry becomes artificial and shallow. The poetry which lacks in contemplation is bound to be superficial and reactionary. We find nothing in it except emotional reaction to the surrounding. Satirical poems on social or individual issues are the fine examples of such reactionary poetry. Reactionary poetry is bound to be secondary, even though people clap in appreciation of it when presented on stage. This kind of poetry never compels us to introspect. I think black humor is always superior to satire. Unwanted ornamentation or beautification suffocates poetry. The poet's choice of adjectives helps us to easily identify the suffocation of poetry. Inappropriate use of adjectives degrades the poetry into rhetoric. Poetry cannot have its unique identity unless it has unique experiences and expression, unless it offers new experiences and new styles of expression. If it lacks the uniqueness of experience and expression, it fails to have its own face and would never be recognizable in the crowd. I believe rhythm cannot be excluded from any serious discussion on poetry. Rhythm is the power of poetry, and the form could be considered as its body. A good poem, though it is written in free verse, has still a hypnotizing rhythm. Rhythm and form are intimately associated with the language, and therefore a poet should be very conscious about the use of this language. The defining qualities or parameters of poetry help us to draw a borderline between the genuine and the fake poetry. One of the main functions of criticism should be to explain the defining characteristics or parameters of the genuine poetry. After such a long discussion of the parameters of poetry, let me introduce briefly the Marathi poetry. Marathi poetry has a long tradition of 9 centuries. It started with the bhakti poetry of Saint Jnaneshwar and Saint Tukaram. It continued up to the early years of 19th century. The British rule started from 1818 in Maharashtra, and it gave birth to the poetry dominated by the British philosophy of liberalism, utilitarianism, and individualism, resulting in a strong, active ideology of social reformation. An equally powerful Gandhian thought, leading to the tradition of nationalism, also attracted the poets of 1940s and 50s. An important break with the colonial legacy of social idealism occurred in the 40s with the emergence of new poetry, predominantly associated with Bal Sitaram Mardekar. He inaugurated a new kind of poetic tradition in Marathi by rejecting the tradition of not only the tradition and social idealism, but also that of sentimentalism, domesticity, and rhetoric. Sharash Chandra Muktibodh was another significant poet who, unlike Mardekar, was a committed Marxist. He considered poetry as an agenda for social action and revolution. Vinda Karandikar was also influenced by Marxist ideology in the beginning, but later his poetry became complex point of the convergence of the social, the personal, and the meditative. The 60s constitute the landmark in the post-independence Marathi poetry. Given the ideological change and its broad literary fallout, a number of literary movements started emerging during this period. These include the Little Magazine movement, the Dalit literature movement, Gramin or rural literature movement, and a later stage in 70s and 80s, feminist movement and tribal movement. Of these, Little Magazine movement is one of the earliest ones to have started. This movement challenged the premises of the literary established canon by rejecting its basis of aesthetic categories and formalism. For the members of this movement, literature was social expression of inner compulsions and contradictions. The Little Magazine movement provided a space for the anger and the angst of the new generation in the 60s. It was also during late 50s and 60s the Dalit literature movement in Maharashtra laid its presence felt. Using Dr. Ambedkar's social philosophy as a base and a source of inspiration as well as Buddha's philosophy, the Dalit literature made a strong plea for the expression of the oppressed and the downtrodden caste consciousness. Namdev Dhasal was perhaps the major poet of the Dalit literature. The prominent voices in this movement are Daya Pawar, J.B. Pawar, Arjun Dangle, Prakash Jadhav, Arun Kale, etc. Feminist literature, like tribal literature, belongs to the 70s and 80s, rejecting the notion of woman as the other, patriarchy and gender inequality. Prabha Ganorkar, Malika Amar Sheikh, Kavita Mahajan, Pradnya Daya Pawar are some of the significant voices in this movement. Anuradha Patil is the major poetess who, keeping distance from the feminist movement, has written the excellent poetry that is on par with the best poetry of the age. An alternative tradition in Marathi literature during post-70s period is Adivasi or tribal poetry. As a result of their cultural displacement in the process of modernization, the tribal cultures were jolted out of their traditional identity and had to face the problem of the loss of identity. It is in poetry that tribal consciousness finds its expression. Vahru Sonavne started this movement and its culmination occurs in the poetry of Bhujanga Meshram. Once again, coming back to the poetry of the post-60s, the two major poets who were responsible for the paradigm shift in Marathi are Arun Kolatkar and Dilip Purushottam Chitre. Both of them were bilingual poets writing in Marathi and English. Chitre developed his dialectic of the self and the universe in terms of the metaphors of the sexual union. Arun Kolatkar provides a complete contrast to Chitre, in that his poetry is a series of surrealistic comments on the fragmented self in the urban space. His later major works of poetry, such as Bhijgi Wahi, that means soaked notebook, focused on the sufferings of various women ranging from mythological, medieval to contemporary world. The last 3 decades have widened the poetic scenario to a large. A number of poets from various regions, communities, castes, and religions have occupied the mainstream. Yet, the poets need to consider the problems posed by all-pervading globalization on one side and the increasing tensions because of the extremist rightist forces and intolerance in general to the other side. It remains to be seen how they encounter this situation by creating a new poetic idiom. Friends, I know I have spoken more than you might have expected from me about poetry. But poetry is close to my heart, and therefore it is almost inevitable. To love poetry genuinely and keep it alive is the great challenge of our time, especially when irrationality and falsehood seem to reign the entire society. And I am not pessimistic about the future. Once again, I thank you all of you and all the organizers. Thank you very much.